taken over CUB, we found that we had inherited an extraordinary business, technically as good as any brewer in the world, and with nearly 50% market share in Australia. It was just fantastic. Profits 28% on sales. So we thought, how do we exploit this wonderful asset, this great company which had been a sleeping giant in Australia for a long time? Clearly we couldn't expand much more in Australia with having already had 50% of the market. So we set our eyes on going to both the United States and the UK, and we started research into the 4 or 5 big brewers in the UK first, all of whom seemed grossly undervalued, and all of whom owned thousands and thousands of pubs. Having analysed and looked at them all, Peter Scanlon was heavily involved, Richard Wiesner, Bob Cowper, I brought them back into the fold to look at all this. We came up with the conclusion that the best buy was Allied Lyons. We could buy Allied Lyons, sell off all of its multitudinous number of food businesses, and maybe sell half of the pubs, thus still keeping control, and the whole deal would have cost us nothing. We were going to launch a £1.5 billion, which was about $3.5 billion bid. We worked very hard with Hill Samuel in London, and then Jarrett and I went to the US. Citibank led the consortium. We had to put the money together. They came back with a positive response, and we were about to launch the biggest takeover in the history of the UK. Well, if you say it shocked the UK when we bid, that would be an understatement. Clearly nobody could believe it. So we made the bid after we'd acquired 6% of the stock, clearly putting the consortium of banks together. Some of the banks leaked the information and it was getting back to Allied Lyons. And once an offer is made for your company in the UK, then the company cannot issue any more shares, which would have been a defensive action, and they also can't buy any other businesses. So we had no option. We would have preferred to have had 10% of the stock, but at 6% we made the bid. £1.5 billion bid. Well, I don't think the British establishment really liked it much at all. At the same time as we were doing that, we had also agreed that we needed to get as much publicity as we could for the Foster's brand. We would have to overcook it, because that was the brand we were taking to the UK, because it was already going well. So we sponsored the VFL Grand Final, and because it was Victoria's 150th year, it went all round the world, the football. We then also sponsored the Melbourne Cup, and that is a story in itself. We went and saw the chairman and deputy chairman of the VRC and suggested that the Melbourne Cup, which had been languishing, only had about $350,000 in prize money, and the Golden Slipper had gone ahead of it. And we said, we tell you what we'll do, we'll put $1 million into the Melbourne Cup for 1985. So we did this. Well, they said, that'd be fantastic. Then we said, but you'll have to call it the Foster's Melbourne Cup. Well, do you reckon they weren't upset? They told us under no circumstances would it be called the Foster's Melbourne Cup. So we said to them, well, would you mind at least taking it back to your board and getting them to consider it? Because both of the gentlemen, the vice chairman turned out to be my father-in-law later, were very conservative men from rural backgrounds. Well, about 3 weeks later, back it came, yes, they would accept it. Obviously the chairman and the deputy chairman had been rolled, and the committee said what a wonderful thing to get $1 million into the Melbourne Cup. So that was that. I did start thinking, who on earth could we bring over as key guests for the Cup? Because the VRC always brought some, very good guests. We had Gene Shrimpton, who turned up before that. And I was talking to Tony Eggleton of the Liberal Party. He said, it's Victoria's 150th year, why don't you try and get the Prince and Princess of Wales? So I said, Tony, you know all these people and over there better than anybody else. Why don't you test out the water and see if they'd be prepared to come? Well, he came back and said they would. So we immediately went down to the VRC. We said, well, we think we've got the guests that you will come over for the Melbourne Cup this year. They said, it's all very well for you wanting to sponsor the race and put $1 million in, but you're not going to tell us who the guests are going to be. We run the race. I said, well, just a minute, wait till we tell you who it is. When we told them it was the Prince and Princess of Wales, and that we had already received nominal support from them to say they would like to come, well, then he fell over. But I did say, now it's over to you to fix it, because we have a Labor Prime Minister in Bob Hawke, and we have a Labor government here in Victoria, so you've got to take the running on this. We don't want to be seen to be involved at all. So that was just sensational. So in September, we launched the bid for Allied Lyons in 1985, and then the fracas started. One of the funniest things is when the Cup was run, of course, Prince Charles was out here. We got fantastic publicity because Princess Di at the dining table before the race said, Mr. Elliott, I've had a good idea. Why won't you fill the cup full of Frosters? I said, it's a wonderful idea. Prince Charles agreed that it could be done. The chairman was aghast, and they would not allow it. So after the race, What a Nuisance won the race, Lloyd Williams' horse. We were walking down to the presentation area, and Di said to me, how did you go? I said, oh, they wouldn't have a bar of filling the cup up with Fosters. So she went over and spoke to Prince Charles. So then the chairman presented me, and I had to introduce Prince Charles. And Prince Charles got up and said, what a wonderful day. Isn't it a pity that the first Foster's Melbourne Cup is not frothing over with the Fosters? Although I suppose most of it's all in London. Well, that hit the newspapers. The 5 dailies in England, they had cartoons, it was headline news, and she turned to me and said, would you give him a job in the marketing department? I said he could have a job for life. We got our money's worth. It was a fantastic piece of publicity for us. Now, and Charles also told me that in the royal family there was a huge debate going on. The Duke of Edinburgh wouldn't have a bar of this Antipodean company, CUB, Elders IXL, coming over and buying Allied Lyons, but Prince Charles took the opposite view over the dinner table and said it's fantastic. So it even had royalty talking. The English were very devious. They threw us into the Monopolies Commission, and the result of that was that we could be locked up for anywhere up to 9 months. And their issue was, were we financially strong enough to actually bid for Allied Lyons? Now that is a crucial point. We were in the Monopolies Commission for 3 months, maybe longer, and I secured a meeting on Christmas Eve with the Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. I was invited to number 10 Downing Street. I explained to her, it was a fantastic lunch, only 3 guests, she and her husband and her note taker. We had a 2-hour lunch, and I explained to her the 5 issues that we had with the way the Monopolies Commission worked. Within 3 months of that luncheon, she had implemented all the changes. She was a marvellous Prime Minister, and she understood things and got them done. That's where I'm going to end this episode, because what happened was we had to find a way to overcome this financial risk, and that's where we decided that we would maybe get into bed with BHP.